He won an MVP. He was a 9-time Gold Glove winner. He was the face of the New York Yankees. And he never got to hold a World Series ring. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because something broke inside him before anyone realized it was breaking. This is the story no one ever heard Don Mattingly tell, because he never told it. And that silence, the one he carried for decades, might be the most revealing thing about him. Indiana was not the place where big dreams began. It was the place where children learned to grow up before they were ready. For Don, childhood was not marked by loud events or dramatic collapses, but by a long, suffocating quiet. A family where discipline sat above emotion. Where responsibility was taught before gentleness. Where praise almost never came and hugs were even rarer. His father was a strict man who believed softness created weakness, that the outside world would never go easy on you, so the home could not either. And in a house like that, Don did not learn to speak his feelings. He learned to swallow them. To press them somewhere deep where no one could see. His mother gave everything she had, but love in that home came through quiet sacrifice, not warm words. So growing up, Don did not lack love. He lacked the language to feel it. He never learned to say he was scared, or sad, or lost. He only learned to keep going. As if continuing was the only thing worth knowing how to do. And while other children found joy in noise, he found peace on the baseball field. Where everything was clear. Where a good hit said everything words could not. Baseball was not just a sport. It was the only place he had control. The only place where effort always produced results. The only place where doing it right meant being seen, not through words, but through silent respect. And over time, the field became his escape from the silences of life. The place he did not need to explain himself. Only stand in position, hold the bat, and do what he did best. But even there, something never completely left him. A quiet isolation that followed him no matter how bright the lights grew. He had friends, teammates, people close by. But he rarely let any of them in. Not because he did not want to. But because he had never been taught how. He had gotten used to carrying everything himself. Used to handling pressure alone. Used to not asking anything from anyone. And that habit, built quietly through years of childhood, began to shape the man he would become in ways no one around him fully understood. On the baseball field, that silence was power. It made him focused, disciplined, unshakable. But off the field, it made him impossible to read. Even those closest to him could not fully reach him. And perhaps what formed in those early Indiana years was not just a personality. It was a way of survival that would follow him all the way to the brightest stages of American baseball and into the moments when everything began to fall apart. His father never softened the standard. Success in that house was never a reason to celebrate. It was simply what was expected. Doing well was obligation, not achievement. And every time Don fell short, the message was clear. Do more. Be better. Faster. And over time, he stopped looking for recognition through words. He sought it only through results. Through action. Through a consistency so absolute it could not be questioned. And in that process, he quietly taught himself to keep everything inside. Not because he had no emotions, but because he had never been given permission to share them. When he was sad, he said nothing. When he was worried, he turned to no one. When pressure came, he worked harder, as if forward motion could dissolve everything he left behind. But nothing ever fully dissolved. It only settled. Accumulated. Became part of him that no one could see. Those years had no explosions, no dramatic fights, only the steady rhythm of a household built on order without softness. And growing up inside it, Don became someone who knew exactly what he had to do but was never quite sure what he was allowed to feel. He grew quieter not because he lacked things to say, but because holding back had become instinct. And that instinct made him exceptional on the field and quietly unreachable everywhere else. When baseball finally gave him a way out, when talent turned into a professional path, he did not hesitate. Not because he was certain of the future, but because it was the only direction that did not lead back to what he was leaving behind. The early years in the minors were hard. No big lights, no widespread attention. Only long bus rides, small fields, and day after day of proving he belonged. But for the first time, he felt something different from expectation. He felt recognition. Not because he had to perform, but because he genuinely had. And that feeling, even though he never named it, landed somewhere deep. In the part of him that had always waited to be told that what he was doing mattered. Each step forward became its own affirmation. And as that belief quietly grew, his silence shifted. No longer just a way to endure. It became the foundation beneath a dream he did not need to speak aloud. Because every day he kept walking already said it. When the New York Yankees came, everything changed in scale. The pinstripes were not just a uniform. They were history, expectation, the weight of every legend who had worn them before. And for a person already built by silence and endurance, the pressure did not arrive as a shock. It settled in slowly, like a thick atmosphere that made everything heavier without anyone being able to point to the source. From promising young talent, he became the team's anchor faster than anyone could have prepared him for. And the shift from the person seeking his place to the person expected to carry everyone else happened so quickly there was no time to adjust. Only to keep moving forward the way he always had. He worked more, trained more, demanded more from himself. Because in a place like New York, no one cared where you came from or what you had sacrificed to get there. The only question was what you could do today and whether you could do it again tomorrow. The media watched every movement, analyzed every miss. And every time he stepped onto the field, it was not just a game. It was a test with no days off and consequences that never ended when the final out was recorded. And yet he did not change how he handled it. Did not explain himself. Did not seek sympathy. He kept silent and kept going. And that made him more reliable, not less. Coaches counted on him. Teammates leaned into the steadiness he projected. Fans believed in him the way you believe in something solid when everything around you feels uncertain. But the price of that reliability was invisible and growing. Because to maintain it, he stopped allowing himself to be imperfect. Every missed hit was not just a play. It lived inside him after the stadium emptied. Every bad game did not end at the final whistle. It continued quietly in his thoughts through the night. And over time, the line between working hard and burying yourself under your own standard began to disappear entirely. He was no longer just playing baseball. He was trying to hold together an image he was not even sure he had chosen. But stopping had never been an option in the world he was raised in. So he kept going. By the mid-1980s, he had reached something close to perfect. The 1985 MVP was not a surprise. It was a confirmation. Every time he stepped into the batter's box, there was a certainty even opponents had to acknowledge. His swing was not flashy. It was precise in a way that made precision look effortless. In the field he moved with a calm that made everything look simpler than it was. And that consistency turned him into something beyond a player. He became a promise. The living proof that the Yankees could rise again. That if one man could hold the line long enough, the rest might follow. But the team never followed all the way. No World Series. No title. Season after season building towards something that kept not arriving. And in an organization where winning is not a goal but an obligation, the absence began to find its way toward him. Not through direct blame, but through the slow shift in the questions being asked. If he was one of the best players in the league, then why were the results still not coming? The media's tone changed. Admiration carried new weight. Expectation with doubt folded inside it. And Don's response was the only one he knew. Work more. Be more. Give more. He pushed past the signals his body was beginning to send. Rest days disappeared. Small pains were not treated, they were overridden by will. And over time something that should have been physical became something larger. The fatigue moved from his muscles into his thoughts. The moments he once enjoyed shortened and faded, replaced by calculations about the next game, the next at-bat, the fear of letting down people who had never asked him directly but whose expectations he carried anyway. While the world saw stability, inside the structure was beginning to crack. The back pain appeared when he was still near his peak. At first he told himself it was ordinary. Part of the job. The kind of ache any athlete accumulates and learns to work around. So he worked around it. Did not stop. Did not speak. And it came back. Not louder, but more persistent. Creeping into the swing. Making movements that had once been pure instinct suddenly required deliberate effort. Speed decreased. Power no longer came as freely. And in the quiet moments when he stopped long enough to feel honestly, a truth started forming that he was not ready to accept. His body was changing in a way he could not train through. But instead of speaking, he adjusted. Changed his approach at the plate. Focused more on contact than power. As if he could hold on to what remained by letting go of what was gone. And because he never explained, because there were no cameras pointed at what was actually happening, the public watched the numbers shift without knowing why. The media analyzed and compared. Fans began to ask questions, first careful ones, then harder ones. And Don met all of it the same way. Short answers. Steady posture. The surface of a man who had everything under control. Underneath, a different battle was running with no audience, no recognition, only pressing against the limits of a body that had been pushed past what it could sustain for too long. Each game became its own test of endurance. Waking up in pain. moving through practice in pain, playing in front of thousands of people in pain that never fully left between days, and still saying nothing. Not because there was nothing to say, but because he had spent his entire life learning not to say it. Because admitting the problem meant confronting what it meant for everything he had built. And that was a question he could not yet face. So he played. And the decline became visible to everyone except those who understood its source. A missed hit in a spot that had once been automatic. A defensive step half a beat late. Stretches of games where he no longer shifted the outcome the way he once had. Each one small alone. Together they told a story no one wanted to hear. And then it ended. Not with a dramatic announcement. Not with a moment that wrapped everything up cleanly. He stepped away in the same quiet manner he had carried through his entire career. No ring on his hand. No final crowning season. No Hall of Fame induction waiting on the other side. Just a door that closed without ceremony in a journey everyone watching believed deserved so much more. That absence became its own kind of weight. Not failure. Too much had been accomplished for that word to fit. But incompleteness. The specific grief of coming so close to something for so long and never touching it. And the questions that formed in the stillness after retirement were not loud. They did not arrive as bitterness or blame. They settled in quietly. In the moments between everything else. In the way a man who had once been utterly certain on a baseball field now sat with things that would never have clear answers. He returned to the game in a different role. Coaching with the Yankees organization. Then the Dodgers. Then the Marlins. And he did not teach through speeches. He taught the way he always lived. Through presence, through consistency, through the kind of calm that only comes from a person who has already stood at the peak and survived what followed it. Young players did not just see a former star. They saw someone who understood both sides, who knew the feeling of everything opening up and the feeling of watching it close. And he gave them what he had learned without needing to be recognized for the giving. At home, the silence was different. There, it was understood. His family did not need the numbers or the titles to know who he was. They saw the pauses, the thoughts he kept inside, the small gestures he offered instead of the words he had never fully learned to use. And in that space, for the first time, he did not have to prove anything. Could exist without maintaining an image. Could simply be present with the people who were not measuring him against anything. And in that imperfect, private peace, something settled in him that the baseball field had never been able to provide. He did not seek late recognition after he walked away. Did not try to rewrite history or reshape the way the world remembered him. He accepted that what happened was what happened. That the ring had not come. That the Hall of Fame door had not opened. That the story had not finished the way he had once believed it would. And he carried that without bitterness, which might be the hardest thing he ever did. Harder than playing through pain. Harder than maintaining that standard when everything inside was wearing down. Harder than any game, because games eventually end. Acceptance does not. What Don Mattingly leaves behind is not a trophy case with a gap in it. It is something quieter and more durable. The example of a man who gave completely, lost something essential before he was finished, never once asked for pity, and kept contributing long after the moment the world stopped watching as closely. In a culture that measures greatness by what you win, his story insists on a different question. Not what did you win, but what did you do when winning stopped being possible? What did you carry? How did you carry it? And what did you pass forward when the lights finally moved on? He answered that without a single press conference. Without a tell-all interview. Without ever once saying out loud what it had cost him. And maybe that silence, the one that started in a quiet Indiana house and followed him all the way to the end, was not just a limitation. Maybe it was also, in its own way, the thing that made him exactly who he was. A man whose dignity never required an audience. And whose story, even unfinished, stands completely on its own. If this moved you, hit subscribe and leave a like for a man who gave everything the world asked of him and never once asked for anything back.